Welcome to Running Hot, Action Network's Motorsports Betting Podcast. I'm your host, Nick Giffen, predictive analyst here at Action Network. Once again, no Stevie Young this week. One more week off for him, and then he'll be back next week as we preview Chicago. So, just me here this week as we're previewing the Quaker State 400 at EchoPark Speedway here on Running Hot. Last weekend at Pocono, Chase Briscoe held off teammate Denny Hamlin with a massive fuel save to get it done at Pocono. Ryan Blaney comes home in third. That gives Chase Briscoe his first win of the season, his first win as a Joe Gibbs Racing driver, locking him into the playoffs as well. So Chase Briscoe, a big fuel save, gets the job done at Pocono. Thought Pocono was a tale of two races. The first half of the race I thought was very good. You saw Ryan Blaney come through the field not once, but twice as he overcame a pit penalty. And then Brad Keselowski also coming in too early and getting a penalty, and he was able to drive through the field. So that first half of the race I thought was spectacular racing. You could make a lot of passes. It was still warm out in the summer, Pennsylvania weather, and it was a very good race, and there was a lot of different strategies going on. I love strategy races. But once we got to stage 3, because of the 2-hour rain delay we had, started getting towards twilight. Temperatures started cooling off. You started getting some shade on the track. Made it really hard to pass. And Chase Briscoe was able to save more than 2 laps of fuel, which, of course, Pocono is a 2.5-mile track. So that is a monster fuel save. And still hold off Denny Hamlin thanks to the cooler, denser air, making it so difficult to pass. It was just incredibly difficult to pass in that third and final stage at Pocono. I think there were only 2 passes inside the top 10 over the whole final 20 laps. So very difficult. So tail 2 races over at Pocono. But Chase Briscoe gets it done and locks himself into the playoffs. This week, we're headed, like I said, to EchoPark Speedway, formerly known as Atlanta Motor Speedway. EchoPark is a 1.5-mile track, but with the repave and reconfiguration before the 2022 season, NASCAR implemented a new rules package for Atlanta to make it a drafting track alongside your Daytonas and your Talladegas. Atlanta is now the 3rd drafting track. We did race at Atlanta earlier this year. Christopher Bell won that race on a late caution where NASCAR had to review the footage to find out who was ahead at the end of the race between Bell, Carson Hocevar, and Kyle Larson on a 3-wide kind of finish there when the yellow came out. So we've already run at Atlanta this year. We are back at Atlanta once again. So I'm not going to take too long to preview Atlanta. Atlanta, like I said, 1.5-mile drafting tracks. The other drafting tracks are Daytona and Talladega. But those are much bigger, 2.5-mile, 2 2/3 mile tracks. Also, they're much more steeply banked. They're wider. So it's a little difficult to compare those tracks to Atlanta. You definitely still can. You definitely still see a lot of the same big names running towards the front. And a lot of the drivers that pop up well at Daytona and Talladega, maybe more in the mid-tier and the lower tier, will still pop up Atlanta as well. But it is still a little bit of a different beast because it's tighter. If there's a crash, it could take out a lot more cars. But there does tend to be fewer overall crashes, especially than Daytona, which are Daytona's the chaos race, the Daytona 500. Everybody wants to win that. And Daytona's typically the playoff cutoff race. So Atlanta actually compares better to Talladega than it does to Daytona, just from a incident rate standpoint. Now, as far as a predictability standpoint, it also compares pretty much the same as Talladega. The best statistical models I can build, machine learning models, can only predict around 10 to 15% of the variance of Atlanta. So this is definitely a race where you want to play it cautious, take a few long shots, sprinkle, and just hope things turn out in your favor. It's very hard to bet the favorites here at Atlanta. My model's number 1 driver in terms of win probability is only a shade above 10%, 10.2% to win at Atlanta. So, you can't really be betting guys that are under 10-1 odds to win this race. So we'll have to find some value further down the board. The other big thing that's going on, this kicks off a 5-week stretch of NASCAR's in-season tournament, a 32 driver tournament, which was set based off of the top 32 in points, and then 3 qualifying races from those top 32, where the best finishing position determined their seed. So we have this in-season tournament. It's a 32 driver bracket, just like your NCAA tournament bracket. It'll go from 32 down to 16 with head-to-head matchups this weekend at Atlanta. The top 16, or I should say the winning drivers from those 16 matchups advancing in the round of 16. Then they'll face off again in bracket style, going down to 8, then 4, then the final 2. So a 5-round tournament begins with this week at Atlanta, next week at Chicago, the week after at Sonoma, the week after that for the final 4 will be at Dover, and then the championship race for the in-season tournament will be at the Indianapolis Motor Speedway, with the Brickyard 400 a fitting way to end the in-season tournament. So we do have 16 round 1 matchups. Those are all being offered as matchups at multiple sportsbooks. DraftKings, BetMGM, Bet365, and Caesars, all currently at the time I'm recording this, have matchups that you can bet on for all 16 of those matchups. So we'll be sure to talk about those in this episode as well, because those matchups are for Atlanta specifically. We'll also talk about the tournament as a whole, because Atlanta does kick off the tournament. And make sure you check out actionnetwork.com for my Giffen guide to the NASCAR bracket as well. I will be writing it up on Thursday. Hopefully it will be released Thursday afternoon, evening, or Friday morning in time for your betting and bracket filling out purposes, because NASCAR.com is running a bracket. DraftKings is running a bracket pool. So all sorts of bracket pools out there you can join as well. So make sure you tune in to actionnetwork.com for those. But that said, we need to get into our bets. As always, we'll drive through the race stage by stage. I'll give a shorter odds pick in stage 1. Then I'll increase the odds as we go into stage 2. Finally, I'm going to race through stage 3 and end up in victory lane with my longest odds bet for this week. So it's time to throw the green flag on the Quaker State 400 and fire off for stage 1. All right, stage 1 here. I am looking at these head-to-head matchups for this tournament, but of course that means for this Atlanta race. And my favorite value is taking the number 31 seed, Noah Gragson, over the number 2 seed, Chase Briscoe. You can get that plus 150 at DraftKings. You can even get that plus 155 at Caesars at the time that I'm recording this. Look, I have this matchup pretty much as a coin flip. In fact, my model has Noah Gragson slightly favored over Chase Briscoe. Yes, my model has the 31 seed favored over the 2 seed. This is not NCAA tournament March Madness. This is NASCAR, baby. And this is drafting track extraordinaire stuff. When the drafting tracks come out, like I said, the randomness, the variance is so high. Only about 10 to 15% of the finishing position can be reliably predicted, the order of the finishing position. So you got to think of most of these matchups as pretty close to coin flips. And in this case, with Noah Gragson versus Chase Briscoe, I have, again, the 31 seed favored here in my model. Now, you might be saying, well, Noah Gregson's been terrible at Atlanta. He has, but he's only had one clean race. Every other race, he's been caught up in some kind of incident. And that's pretty unusual, because Atlanta is the lowest incident rate track of all 3 drafting tracks, Atlanta, Daytona, and Talladega. So a lot of bad luck here for Noah Gragson. It's inflating his odds. But when Noah Gragson does not have an incident at a drafting track, he has a 50% top 10 rate, 50% rate of finishing inside the top 10. 4 out of 8 times he's been incident-free. He's finished inside the top 10. Contrast that to Chase Briscoe, who only has a 29.4% top 10 rate in his non-major incident super speedway races. By the way, at Atlanta, the time Noah Gragson did not have a major incident in his one Atlanta race where that didn't happen, he did beat Chase Briscoe. Now, if we look at all super speedway tracks, so Atlanta, Daytona, Talladega, Chase Briscoe does lead Noah Gragson in head-to-heads, but only by a score of 10-9. So only a 52.6% win rate. That means a 47.4% win rate for Noah Gragson. Well, 47.4 is still well above the 40% implied odds you need at plus 150 or even plus 155. You only need a little bit under 40%. So Noah Gragson should pretty much be a coin flip here with Chase Briscoe. You're getting plus 150 or plus 155. That is absolutely way too long. You have to take Noah Gragson over Chase Briscoe. And also, if you're filling out a bracket, Noah Gragson is going to be my pick as a nice leverage play here in the first round in a drafting randomness track. So give me Noah Gragson plus 150 over Chase Briscoe as my stage 1 pick. All right, one stage down, we're going to fill up, get some tires, and fire up their stage 2. And in doing so, I'm going right back to this bracket madness. Another head-to-head matchup. Going to go a little bit further down the odds board in terms of matchup odds. And I'm going to take Erik Jones plus 170 over Ross Chastain. This is actually plus 190 if you can get this at Caesars, but I've seen plus 170, plus 160 available at BetMGM, at DraftKings, for example. So a lot of spots you can take this. This is good down pretty close to around plus 125 or so. Look, I have Erik Jones, like I said, an underdog in this matchup to Ross Chastain, but not a heavy underdog. I have him at plus 107 as fair. So like I said, if you want some wiggle room in the model, you can take this down around plus 120, plus 125, I think is good. But plus 170, plus 160, plus 190, just way too long. Again, if we play the head-to-head comparison at super speedways like we did with Noah Gragson versus Chase Briscoe, let's do that since 2021, which is when Ross Chastain moved to Chip Ganassi Racing, which Trackhouse then bought Chip Ganassi. So essentially in his current equipment, and Erik Jones has also been in that his current equipment since 2021. Since then, Ross Chastain leads Erik Jones at super speedways and head-to-head matchups, but only by a 13-12 score, right? So, I mean, that's, again, one race away from 50-50, and that includes just an 11-10 head-to-head lead since 2022 when we moved to the next-gen era, and both drivers have been with their official current teams. So you can't really think this is a matchup where Ross should be super heavily favored. And in fact, Erik Jones has put up some very good races in the next-gen era, and Erik Jones and Ross Chastain actually battled each other for a win in 2022 at Talladega. Ross Chastain coming home victorious there, but that shows you one little push here, one little bump draft there, one little move here or there can absolutely change things. And you can't pass up a driver that should be near a coin flip at plus 170 or plus 160 or plus 190 because, again, you just need around 35, 37% implied odds. And I have Erik Jones winning this matchup close to 45% of the time, 48% of the time, actually, in my model. So I'm absolutely diving in to these in-season tournament head-to-head matchups, which, of course, begin here round 1 at Atlanta. And I'm going to take Erik Jones over Ross Chastain. That's some pretty good plus money for stage 2. All right, we've run through stage 1 and stage 2. We're going to drive all the way through stage 3 as well. Take the checkered flag, cross the start-finish line, and drive off into victory lane 4, my victory lane pick. Now, this pick is very sportsbook specific. This is over at DraftKings. And to navigate to this one, instead of betting on the Atlanta race, we're going to bet on the in-season tournament as a whole. So over at DraftKings, you have to go to Motorsports and then go to NASCAR Cup Series Championship, which is where you can find the in-season challenge over there on DraftKings. And what I'm doing is I am taking a driver to win this tournament. But I do have a little bit of an eye out on some cash out option, which is what DraftKings is offering. So that's my strategy here. I am taking Daniel Suarez 70-1 to win the NASCAR In-Season Challenge 2025 over at DraftKings. And my goal here is for Suarez to reach the Final Four. If he reaches the Final Four, we can look at a cash out offer because it'll definitely go up, but that's where Suarez may start to run into some more difficult matchups. But his first 3 rounds set up incredibly well. Against Bubba Wallace this weekend, he's essentially a coin flip. This could very well lose on the first race, and most of these matchups are pretty close to coin flips, a little bit of favorites to especially some of the wider gap matchups, but he's essentially a coin flip in this first round. But I would argue if he gets past this first round, he would be favored in every single remaining matchup, unless potentially he faces Alex Bowman next weekend at Chicago. I think Alex Bowman would be maybe slightly favored over Suarez, but again, that would be pretty close to a coin flip. But against Joey Logano, Daniel Suarez would absolutely be favored at Chicago. Then we would move on to Sonoma, where most likely he would face one of Denny Hamlin, Kyle Busch, or Brad Keselowski. He'd be favored over all 3 of those drivers, maybe a coin flip versus Kyle Busch, but definitely favored over the other 2 drivers and highly favored over Ty Dillon should he somehow advance that far to face Daniel Suarez. So we're looking at situations where Suarez is at worst 3 straight coin flips, at worst. So that's 50%, 25%, 12.5%, right? That would be 7-1 to make it to the Final Four at worst. Now, he may be more like 6 or 5 or 4-1 to make it to the Final Four simply because he'll have favorable matchups as his road progresses through the tournament here, especially knowing he's going to be on the race-winning strategy for these road course races without a win in his pocket yet, unless he wins Atlanta. But then, hey, he's already advanced a round. So the idea is to get Daniel Suarez into the Final Four and look to see what the cash-out offer is. If the cash-out offer is good enough, and if the matchup might be difficult enough, we can take the cash-out offer. If not, we can let it ride, and all of a sudden, we've got a guy in the Final Four that we got for 70-1 odds to win this tournament. We can find some ways to hedge that if we want to bet on against him in a matchup, things like that. So there's lots of ways to play this Daniel Suarez tournament win bet at 70-1 odds. We just want to kind of do this old Giffen guide to March Madness, right? Get him to advance 3 rounds and then see if we cash him out. So it's going to be kind of fun. We're going to have a little bit of Giffen guide to March Madness style deal with rolling it over on Daniel Suarez. So we're not rolling it over. You can't really do that. You just got to take his 70-1 outright here. So Daniel Suarez, 70-1 in-season tournament winner is my victory lane pick. So that is going to do it for us. Thanks for listening to the Quaker State 400 episode of Running Hot, Action Network's Motorsports Betting Podcast. If you'd like to tail some of the bets we discussed today, look for the quick slip link in the podcast and video description, or go to actionnetwork.com/bet now. Stevie will be joining me again next week to talk bets for the Grant Park 165 at the Chicago Street Course. So until then, thanks again for listening, and we'll see you back here next week on Running Hot from Action Network.